All right, we got how money has become Marvel's greatest villain. How money is the villain, not their ideology. Wow, I said that all wrong. Not their ideologies.
Pedro Pascal is bringing
the money.
Every dad powers to one of Marvel's smartest and most malleable superheroes.
Yeah, they're trying to make Pedro
soon.
Mr. Fantastic.
A recent Variety article showing just how bright the Marvel dumpster fire is currently burning.
Fantastic Four, 20th Century Fox.
And with the Marvels absolutely tanking at the box office.
What do you mean it tanked? I thought it did good.
Some attention away from its
it was mid. My review's coming out.
And what better way to do that than to leak one of the stars of its most anticipated projects? Pedro Pascal is without
Pedro Pascal.
But I must admit, I'm a bit disappointed.
Since Disney took over Marvel's trash, DC has always been trash.
Money, and
I agree.
In my mind, Pedro seems like the perfect manifestation.
Pedro's awesome.
Problem. So, let's get into how Pedro Pascal proves money is Marvel's greatest villain.
No, you can't complain about it.
Hear the old saying, if your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail? Well,
yes.
It's becoming increasingly clear that Disney's only real tool is money, which they have been throwing around with abandon to mix results.
Eternals. What a tank. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania was also a tank, unfortunately.
Is that at a certain point, spending more cash on a movie ultimately makes it worse. Once these blockbusters start to approach $200 million budgets, they become an investment the studio absolutely can't afford to lose. These bloated budgets create an Ouroboros effect where the more money they spend on a project, the more risk-adverse the studio becomes, which manifests itself by second.
Since he's mentioned a character in Warframe's Riri trailer, looks like him.
To take safe routes.
It looks like who? Ant-Man?
Mediocre B cinema score rating and
or MODOK. Hopefully you're talking about.
Significantly tinker in post-production is just a subtle reminder that these suits are more interested in making a product to be pleasurably consumed than a piece of artistic expression. This all leads to my first.
Oh, it looks like Pedro.
Problems, which isn't a lack of resources, but a surplus.
I'm okay with that.
The fact of the matter is, Marvel just doesn't make stars like they used to.
Hell yeah, nice Nitro. They don't make them like they used to. That is so true.
In 2009, after Marvel bet it all on Iron Man and won, Vulture published a story with a now infamous headline: "Marvel rolls dice, cast no names for Thor." Vulture was absolutely right. What makes this headline so funny in hindsight is a testament to how creatively brilliant the MCU's output was in the run-up to Avengers Endgame.
Yeah.
Chris Hemsworth was George Kirk for a heroic 10 minutes, and Tom Hiddleston didn't even have that much.
For real, we didn't even know these dudes.
Hell, Chris Pratt was also practically a known when he was anointed as
Parks and Rec.
Who? Best known at that point for Andy Dwyer, the lovable Rube on Parks and Recreation. In the early days of the MCU, Marvel knew that it needed to keep its budgets manageable. One of the best ways to accomplish that was to keep above-the-line costs down, like, you know, talent salaries. So, they gambled on up-and-coming actors, hiring essentially C+, B- actors for long-term, multi-picture contracts. Instead of paying for names on a poster, Marvel bet
like Eternals,
the quality of their script.
Angelina Jolie, hey, we'll pay for you to be in our movie.
Are now huge stars. Remember last year when Quentin Tarantino caught heat for saying that the Marvel actors aren't the stars, the characters are? He was right. In the early 2010s, it looked like Marvel already understood that insight, and one could argue that it was a key part in those films' extreme profitability. I have no doubt that Pedro Pascal is going to bring a lot to the role for sure. But gambling on a no-name Reed Richards would have been helpful to Marvel in the long run.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying it doesn't matter who plays Reed.
But I'll tell you, he did a good job.
What a great actor to play him, but he just doesn't need to be a household name. There are plenty of talented unknown actors just waiting for an opportunity like this.
Robert Downey Jr., baby.
Let's look at Robert Downey Jr. for a second. He was already a household name before he stepped into Iron Man, but after being released from prison, his reputation was a bit tarnished, which helped Marvel pick him up for relatively cheap. Downey made $2.5 million for the first Iron Man, a handsome sum for sure.
Yeah.
But by Avengers Endgame, he was pulling down $75 million.
Wow.
To put that into perspective, all of John Wick 3 was made for the same amount of money it took Robert Downey Jr. just to walk on set for Endgame.
Damn.
What I'm trying to make here is that Pascal has some serious heat behind him, and he'll be taking all of that clout to the negotiating table. He's not taking a big franchise role for a measly $2.5 million.
Yeah, especially in the state that they're in now.
And assuming the film's successful, you can be absolutely sure it will be the least amount of money he's ever paid to don the spandex. The Fantastic Four are famous enough to draw a substantial built-in audience, a luxury films like Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor didn't have. Investing in unproven talent would be more than offset by the Fantastic Four's decades-old fanbase and library of storylines. And, more importantly, Marvel would be able
They really got to get the thing right. They keep screwing up the thing.
Already be locked into their multi-picture deals at their less famous rate.
$1. 12.
But it seems that after more than a decade of absolute box office dominance for the studio, Marvel's budgets have become bloated to the point of being a hindrance.
Buddy, you alright?
Why are they using Thor as bloated budget?
The Marvels cost $274 million.
That's how much that movie cost?
Ant-Man and the Wasps cost $200 million.
Oh my god.
Since Endgame, the studio's investments don't seem as sound as they once did. Let's take Quantumania, for example. Watching Marvel's new Thanos-level big bad get his ass kicked by a guy who summons the power of ants and listens to his own audiobook doesn't exactly sound like a "we need to assemble the Avengers" level threat. And it turns out the celebratory ending we got for that film wasn't always what was intended. Rumor has it that Quantumania's ending was changed to be a happier outcome for Scott Lang and his family. It's entirely possible that's true, and if so, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt that the released ending probably tested the best with audiences. But I think we can all agree that it's far from good. The Quantumania ending feels like it was made by committee. Everything feels calculated, and I mean that in a math way, not in a creative way. While the rumored darker ending would have been a better setup for Kang on the big screen, you could see how Disney would have been nervous to make a $200 million gamble on
Yeah, but aren't they firing the guy who played Kang now?
To resolve. That's kind of the problem here. These movies are getting too
because of the allegations
to take any creative risks. Instead, the studio plays it safe and makes for something that I would argue is just destined for the 9th ring of hell, the forgettably mediocre. Good movies are great. Bad movies, well, if they fail in just the right way, they could be fun and memorable.
Whatever you want to wager on, the Money Plane has you covered. You want to bet on a dude, an alligator. Money Plane.
But the forgettably mediocre? That's just time wasted on an experience your memory doesn't even want to bother to catalog. It's literally just wasted time. Marvel's reliance on fixing their films in post has changed the power dynamics of how the studio and filmmakers collaborate. And it's clear that hasn't always been for the best. In the beginning, Marvel trusted its directors and filmmakers to make a great movie. Then came Ant-Man. It didn't seem like such a big deal at the time.
Yeah, Ant-Man was alright.
Edgar Wright walking away from Ant-Man was a real harbinger of things to come.
Really? I know he walked away from the creation.
Wright had been developing Ant-Man since 2003, well before Marvel Studios was even a thing. His original pitch embraced Scott Lang's burglar roots, taking a more Elmore Leonard route with the script, which he continued to develop well after Marvel Studios' Iron Man success. However, the tension between Wright and the studio really started to boil over after the Avengers debuted. The studio saw Ant-Man as a key part of Phase 2 and wanted to use the film to expand the growing and interconnected MCU. Wright saw it as just a standalone story. Eventually, after a few unsuccessful rewrites by Wright and Joe Cornish, the studio decided to have a few of their own writers take a crack at the draft. That was the last straw for Wright, a filmmaker who usually writes and directs all of his own movies. Edgar Wright would go on to tell Variety, "I wanted to make a Marvel movie, but I don't think they really wanted to
so
make
yeah, he
it."
just walked away from it, straight up.
Suddenly becoming a director for hire on it, you're just sort of less emotionally invested, and you start to wonder why you're really there. Director for hire. Yeah, most quality movie directors don't really go for those kinds of gigs. Filmmakers, especially good ones, usually chafe at having to adjust their films to accommodate the needs of someone else. At Marvel, that's now non-negotiable. Those films need to set up other films, or worse, TV shows. Marvel film directors are now just like TV directors, hired hands. Speaking of hired hands, that's kind of where Fantastic Four director Matt Shakman fits in. At the moment, Marvel has more or less alienated itself from the pool of traditional film directors. However, Shakman seems like an ideal candidate to come from Marvel's new preferred mold of directors. He's a veteran TV director who comes with plenty of experience ranging from dramas like Game of Thrones to comedies like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Oh, I love
It's
It's Always Sunny.
Experience having directed all of WandaVision and seems like the perfect hired hand director Marvel needs to turn things around for Phase 6. But even though they have a director and reportedly an actor almost on board, there's still one key component that needs to be meticulously tended to: the story.
In issue number 141 of the Fantastic Four, published in November 1973, Reed Richards has to use his antimatter weapon on his own son.
I was going to ask why that sounded like Tobey Maguire.
Fantastic Four, because they weren't like
because it is.
Heroes. They were more like a family.
The Fantastic Four is without a doubt S-tier Marvel IP, and bringing them into the MCU will need to be done with the utmost care. Luckily for Marvel, the powers that be want them to make less, not only because it will increase the quality of the films, but also because of an age-old economic law.
Beautiful. Beyond compare.
There's a thing in economics called the scarcity principle, which basically shows that the more limited a supply of a good is, the higher the demand is for it. The scarcity principle is best exemplified by the clothing company Supreme, which relies on its deliberately limited supply of clothes to drive hype and prestige around owning them. For a while, the scarcity principle also worked for Marvel too. The obvious benefit of Marvel's early days of limited supply was that it allowed Kevin Feige and the Marvel Studios leadership to focus all their resources on a smaller number of projects, which helped keep the quality so high. It turns out that slow drip of output was a major driver that turned these movies into can't-miss events. Fans lined up opening weekend not only because YouTube pages like this one would be dropping spoilers mere moments after screening started, but also because opening night Marvel screenings were rowdy occasions that couldn't be missed, especially since there were only like 2 or 3 of them a year. We waited for months to see these films, all while the anticipation built. Marvel also had a great system to stoke the hype flames as well, masterfully using the traditional film windowing distribution model. When they got to a point of releasing 3 Marvel movies a year, the previous MCU movie would arrive on home video and streaming right around the same time the new movie came out in theaters, making it easy to catch up if you missed the last one or just wanted to reacquaint yourself. That's the other thing about the limited supply that works so well. It kept it easy for the masses to stay invested in the story.
They talk about this every time, but it's true.
Huge opening weekends regardless of the reviews. And over a decade of $100 million plus opening weekends allowed Marvel to spend like Tony Stark on a bender in Vegas because Disney knew that they'd probably make back their production budget in the opening weekend alone. In its heyday, when they released 3 movies a year, it was relatively easy for most people to stay up to date on the MCU timeline. 3 movies is roughly 6 to 8 hours of content. Over a year, pretty much everybody could find time for 8 hours of movies in order to be reasonably fresh on the lore when going to see the new one. Now, with all the Disney Plus series,
there's so much crap now you couldn't even tell.
Could be a thing of the past. In 2021, the MCU generated over 35 hours of new content across 5 TV shows and 4 movies.
Jesus.
This is just an insane amount of content, especially since the 11 years of MCU that preceded it only generated roughly 50 hours of content. If you're going to spend $200 million on a movie, you need to make sure the film appeals to as many people as humanly possible. Convoluted timelines that span across dozens of movies and TV shows don't help its accessibility.
No.
All that output has alienated casual fans. Of course, there's
Moon Knight was great.
The die-hard MCU fans who watch everything, but for most of us, there's a negative feedback loop at play that's causing the mainstream fan base to slowly lose interest. Marvel needs that fan base to keep the MCU firmly in what's left of the monoculture. Thanks to Disney Plus, there's a constant drumbeat of Marvel releases, which is eroding its cultural capital. If a fan misses one show, and we get it, life happens, it's not too long before the next one comes out, which the fan might be more inclined to miss if they didn't watch the last one.
Bruce.
String together a few missed Disney Plus entries and a big movie release with middling reviews, and that's pretty much the recipe to turn a casual fan into an apathetic one. Regardless of how the film was reviewed, the post-credit scenes and their continuity consequences was the thing that pulled a ton of people to theaters. They needed to know what was getting set up next. But if you missed out on a few series, keeping with the continuity might not be as important as it once was. The more casual fans Marvel loses, the more the MCU atrophies, making it harder to justify the hundreds of millions of dollars Marvel has gotten comfortable spending on projects. Disney CEO Bob Iger has figured out that Marvel's output has blown past the law of diminishing returns. The truth of the matter is that the hundreds of millions of dollars Disney has spent on the Disney Plus shows hasn't quite helped the stream return a profit, and I doubt it's moving the same levels of merch as the movies did during their endgame heyday either. But Marvel needs to do more than reduce its output. It'll also need to reduce its budgets. There's been a lot of talk about the budget of Blade being less than $100 million. I think that's a step in the right direction.
Bro,
it doesn't even betray.
Just bring Wesley Snipes back, bro. You know what I mean?
1997's Blade was made for $45 million, and for a brief time was the most successful Marvel.
Dude, Blade is amazing. I don't care who says what. Blade is so great.
As a horror movie, and on the balance, horror movies are usually cheap and profitable. Look at Five Nights at Freddy's.
Five Nights at Freddy's is a good movie too.
$20 million, and so far has brought in over $127 million at the box office. Blade can be a Blumhouse-esque win if Marvel
one of my favorite movies of all time, Blade.
Creative direction and risks ahead of time, and follow the tried and true
Wesley
path of
Snipes.
making films. I don't start production until you have a good script, involve the VFX teams early, and use pre-production.
When he's gonna turn around and stomps on that guy,
shot, so you don't have to do reshoots or encounter any gremlins in post-production. It's definitely possible to deliver movies with big production value on small budgets. With the X-Men and Fantastic Four, Marvel has some actual A-list properties.
You know how many times I watched that movie?
They can use to try and reverse the audience apathy that's plaguing the studio. Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards is a safe bet, but the Fantastic Four doesn't need Pedro.
I forgot that that's what this video was about.
Reed Richards and company have been some of the most popular Marvel heroes for decades. They're Marvel's first family. There's years and years of stories to adapt. Let's hope Marvel takes the right risks and delivers an amazing story. A ton of people who will show up opening weekend will be doing so as Fantastic Four fans first and Pedro Pascal fans second.
This is the way.
Like Tarantino so eloquently said, the actors aren't movie stars, or in this case, Mr. Fantastic and the Fantastic Four are the stars. Let's hope Marvel remembers this lesson and places more confidence in their stories rather than just relying on their ability to cut checks to get bigger but less profitable names on their poster.
And they gotta stop screwing up Dr. Doom as well.
Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out some.
Well, that was crazy. That video was so long that I literally forgot what the beginning movie was about. It's about Pedro Pascal being Mr. Fantastic. It went through. We were on a roller coaster right there, guys. I had no idea where it was going. Okay. Well, now we know. And Pedro Pascal probably going to be Mr. Fantastic. It might be good. Who knows? That's funny.